Sanbonoin. Aibo. Sanbonan. Okay, there we go. Okay. Good afternoon, morning, afternoon. Manan kancane nje, guys. Technical issues. Yeah, this one there's a kancane. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, my darling. Good afternoon. And welcome. Okay, I'm a bit nervous, sorry. I'm trying to gather myself. Okay, the month of May is recognized as Africa Month, a time when the continent of Africa commemorates the founding of the Organization of African Unity. The establishing of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, the African continent became a pioneer in being the first continent to focus on continental unity and to encourage nation building through unity and freedom from oppression. It is in the celebration of this milestone of the OAU and its successor, the African Union, that the Center of the Advancements of Non-Racialism and Democracy, in collaboration with the Nelson Mandela University International Office and the Faculty of Education, is hosting this event today. Yet, even before 1963, many initiatives were taken by Africans, both from the continent and its diaspora, for Africa to regain its rightful place in the world. South Africans are also found amongst those earlier generations who made enormous contributions towards this effort. The speech of Pixlika Isikasimi in 1906 on the regeneration of Africa would be echoed by the generations that followed and enhanced through a number of initiatives aimed at the decolonization and regeneration of the continent. A beautiful Wednesday afternoon to everybody in this room. Sanbonani Jambo Kodi. I am Notowandile Cele, your program director for the final Africa Month event, hosted by the Center of the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy in collaboration with the Nelson Mandela University International Office and the Faculty of Education. I, and I hope you as well, both in this room and to those who are joining us virtually, are ready for the robust conversation where we are joined by Professor Amasa from the University of Johannesburg and his two respondents, Dr. Walter Ndonubia and Dr. Nehemiah Latola, with the roundtable discussion later with Edmondson Pino, Michael Chindora, and Mwai Prudence Msokera. I apologize if I said it wrong. All from Nelson Mandela University, where they will be tackling the topic Higher Education in Africa Today, the roles, challenges, and possible solutions. In isiZulu sithi, so digita udaba ojulile. So sit back, relax but not too much, and take off your jackets. To open this event, I would like to call upon Umpati Wami, the Director of CANRED, Professor Peggy Themba Ngomezulu, to give his opening remarks. Namgelegile.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Ladies and gentlemen, we received sad news yesterday of the passing of Eusebius Makaiser, the person we hosted just recently in March. So I would request that we all stand up and observe a moment of silence in his honor. Thank you very much. You may be seated. May his soul rest in peace. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm mindful of the fact that there are people who are joining us through virtual platforms, so I will cut to the chase. And there are people who are more capable than me to run this event, so I won't be long. I would start off by saying Sanbonani, Molweni, habari zenu, Good afternoon. Anyone who understands Kiswahili here? No one. Oh, I have a lot of work to do. Okay, so if I say habari zenu, then would have responded mzuri sana. So, but I'll teach you after the event. Okay, I greet to all of you who have come here to attend this event in person, as well as those who are joining us through virtual platforms. It's a great pleasure to briefly address you on this auspicious occasion to mark the end of Africa Month. We are deeply humbled by your presence. The event has been staged, as the program director said, by the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy, that is CANRAD, in collaboration with the university's international office and the education faculty. As is usually the case, we also receive support from the humanities faculty, particularly the Department of History and Political Science. We are very grateful for this continued collegiality. I will be very succinct since I'm not the speaker. We invited esteemed colleagues who are going to assist us in talking about, in discussing today's topic. But for me, it's just to highlight a few issues which might be of interest and of relevance to this discussion. When 32 African countries converged in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to establish the Organization of African Unity, that is the OAU, on the 25th of May 1963, there were two aims that they wanted to achieve, or that they hoped to achieve. One of them was to promote unity and solidarity of African states, and then the other one was to coordinate and intensify their cooperation and efforts to achieve a better life for the people of Africa. So these were not the only ones, but I highlighted these two for interest's sake. In other words, these leaders envisioned a continent that will be united, self-sustainable, and autonomous. The extent to which these and other goals have been achieved remains a bone of contention. As African leaders reconfigured various institutions at independence, higher education was one of the top priorities. This was premised on the belief that higher education institutions were going to produce the necessary manpower needed to serve the independent states, including, of course, governments at the time. At times, political and academic leaders clashed. As politicians attempted to control higher education institutions, academics resisted and invoked concepts such as academic freedom and university autonomy. Such hostile relations pitted these two types of leaders against each other. In other countries such as South Africa and Kenya, the race issue aggravated the situation. Different reactions to neo-colonial tendencies also further divided Africans and made it difficult for the African continent to achieve unity. The conversion of the OAU into the African Union in in Durban 2002 was an admission that the OAU was not able to achieve all its goals, hence the need to reconstitute the organization under a new name. Noticeably, one of the objectives of the AU are related to the original aims of the OAU. This objective is, I quote, to achieve a greater unity, cohesion and solidarity between African countries and their people. It is related to the one that I read earlier on. The common denominator in what the OAU and the AU wanted to achieve is unity of the African continent. The AU's Agenda 2063, described as Africa's blueprint and master plan for transforming Africa into a global powerhouse in the future, is in fact relevant in today's discussion. Here too, the aim is to make the outside world dispensable by ensuring that the African continent can stand on its own and, of course, be a force to be reckoned with. Now, against this backdrop, the following 5 questions deserve to be addressed. The first one is, to what extent have we as the African continent succeeded in eliminating those factors which weakened the OAU so that the AU can in fact be a success story? So that is the first question that we need to ponder about. The second question is, what is the nature of the relationship between political and academic leadership in Africa today? As I've said, in the 1960s, there was a clash of ideas between the two. Now, what is the nature of that relationship? The third question is, what is the standing of African higher education institutions today compared to yesteryears? If you compare our institutions today to those of the 1960s, how do they compare? And then the penultimate question is, what role should African higher education institutions play to contribute to the AU's continental agenda? And then the last one is, which challenges do these institutions have to contend with, and how should these challenges be resolved? We are looking forward to our esteemed colleagues to assist us in trying to navigate our way through these and other questions so that at least we can be in a position to reconfigure the AU with the hope that it's going to take this continent to the stratosphere. May all of you enjoy the last few hours of the 2023 Africa Month. Ngiyabonga, ndwaliboa, asante sana, kialeboha, enkosi, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ngomezulu. I forgot his name there for a second, sorry. I will now introduce, I will call upon Prof. Ntsikelelo Breakfast to, sorry, I'm literally having a brain fart, to introduce the guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On a lighter note, I was cracking a joke with on the sidelines that on my way to this place I was driving at a high speed, but then when I got there I realized that none of you has settled down. But you know, she managed to cool me off that no, African time does apply. But anyway, colleagues, be that as it may, I'm going to read the CV of the guest, namely Professor Amasa Philip Ndofirepi. He is a fully fledged professor of history and philosophy of education and the head of School of Education at Sol Plaatje University and a research associate at the Ali Mazwari Center for Higher Education Studies at UJ, and has co-authored about 10 books. He is a PhD holder. He holds a PhD from Wits University and a master's degree from the University of Zimbabwe and a B.Ed from the same university, and has an academic career lifespan which runs over 35 years. His PhD thesis was titled Philosophy for Children, the Quest for an African Perspective, and out of that he has managed to find his niche and has published locally and internationally. Among other things, he's also a CNRF rated scholar. Let's clap hands for him. And also he has been a postdoc at UJ. And without any further ado, I will hand over to my colleague. Thank you very much.
You can come up front, Prof. Thank you. Hello, yeah.
Can I get there? Can I use them?
Do you want the
Can I use
podium?
them? Yeah.
Yeah, you can use the podium if you want. Okay, come here.
Colleagues, good afternoon, Salvanani. That's as far as I can go. And thank you very much to the program director, and thank you to the colleague who has introduced me to you. I'm very excited to stand in front of you today, and I would like to extend my greatest thanks to my long-term colleague, and I always want to call him my president for one reason or another, and he always calls me his trusted lieutenant minister, and this is Professor Mngomezulu, for inviting me to this occasion. And colleagues, thank you for making time to listen to a few words that I will share with you. But very, very briefly, I would like to acknowledge the presence of colleagues from the International Office. I might not name them identify them by name. Also colleagues from the Faculty of Education, which is my home, and also those from Humanities, and colleagues from Conrad. Yeah, colleagues, this afternoon, I would like to share with you my philosophy of African higher education. And allow me to start by making some brief introductory remarks. Yes, public universities the world over are dipped in challenging difficulties. Equally, African higher education, learning institutions, and intellectual communities face numerous and difficult problems that may be internal or external. They may be institutional and philosophical. They may be paradigmatic, educational, political, and practical, all at the same time. Questions about the organization, the governance, the financing, the relations to society, and the content of education they provide, while not new, have assumed a heightened agency in political and policy circles in Africa and elsewhere. Then, globalization as a neoliberal process and project amplifies and recasts these issues. In other words, the issues bedeviling higher education, all, in my view, revolve around globalization. To that end, in a rapid globalizing world, the challenges facing government, university leaders, and research professors do not stop. Now, it is the age of the knowledge economy, yet another challenge. My presentation will begin with a brief discussion of globalization, the knowledge economy, and higher education. But my argument is premised on the following claims. One, that higher education plays a vital role in helping Africa develop an internationally competitive economy, a more prosperous and equitable society, and a stable democracy. And two, universities serve to create, advance, absorb, and distribute knowledge through research and teaching, and in the process, they are nurseries of ideas, innovations, and development, and gradually they become reservoirs of knowledge. Three, better education, better learning, and better research, and better products, and better economic growth are prerequisites for better quality for Africans. And fourth claim is that African higher education is a contested space. A contested space with a wide range of epistemological, axiological, metaphysical, and political challenges that are rooted in the mantra for globalization and neoliberal philosophy. One of the key thinkers on African higher education, Mamdani, in 1993, once said to some assembled South African academics, "Are you condemned to suffer a replay of the old African script, or are you in a position to learn from our experiences?" Now, enter globalization. Globalization is the convergence and partial integration of the different parts of the world and of the nations, institutions, and people. One political scientist, David Held, calls it the widening, deepening, and speeding up of interconnectedness on a worldwide scale. This interconnectedness is characterized by global flow of ideas, flows across national borders, flows of people, flows of messages and ideas and knowledge, and flows of goods, money, labor, and production itself. Now, these global flows are the symptoms of globalization. The apparently relentless march of globalization forces a new reckoning for every sector and institutions, including the commercialization of learning, coupled with the rapid expansion of private universities, the increased involvement of private enterprises in the provision of higher education, and the establishment of executive programs in the public universities. Thus, we are seeing a rise of what some call market-oriented universities, entrepreneurial universities, and consumer universities. But I want to take you to yet another level, the place of new technologies, ICTs. What role do they play? The positive and negative potential of the new technologies must be squarely faced by contemporary universities and higher education institutions, by academics, including those of Africa, with the aim of harnessing the positive and safeguarding their role as creators and certifiers of authoritative scholarship. Instead of the universal acceptance, or dismissal, it is more productive to determine which technologies are useful for which students and for which subject matters and for which purposes. Engagement with new technologies allows higher education institutions, including universities, to provide their students with critical techno-literacy, democratized and customized higher learning, and to help to shape the emerging ICT educational regime. For example, the tension between pedagogical and proprietary norms. That leads me to enter into another contested area about higher education and universities, the university as a public good. Understanding higher education and public good is as much a question about the relationship of higher education with society as it is about the purposes and ends of higher education. Based on the proposition that institutional constructs of public good are informed by neoliberalism, which I've always argued in all my my thinking, all my writing, conceptualizations of public good have been historically linked to the notions of the social contract among citizens and between institutions and citizens. As Giraud once observed, tied largely to instrumental purposes and measurable paradigms, many institutions of higher education are now committed to almost exclusively economic growth, instrumental rationality, and preparing students for the workforce. Equally so, a new thinking of what is normally now called the new public management imagines national systems as economic markets and universities and other higher institutions of learning as firms that are driven by desires for economic revenues and market share, not by teaching, not by research and service as ends in themselves. But the general notion of public good, higher education, implies that members, one, learn and develop through active participation in thoughtfully organized service experiences that meet actual community needs. Basic question is, for you and for me, are our universities serving the communities that are supporting them? Public good also implies that members of institutions reflect on the service activity in such a way as to enrich the learning experience and teach civic responsibility and strengthen communities. But my big question for Africa is, can we identify academics and students who are driven by a commitment to the public good? Given the definition that I gave of what we understand by public good, can we identify amongst ourselves or amongst the communities where we live, can we identify those academics who are driven by a commitment to the public good and are progressive, reflexive, and critically conscious, and have an understanding of and commitment to the civic responsibility to advance the public good agenda? Yet another level, I want to take you to the question of rankings as global comparisons of universities and higher education institutions. University rankings, research performance measures, and journal hierarchies that characterize contemporary thinking in higher education are a challenge, are a problem, not only for the developing world, but Africa included. My claim is that in the new knowledge economy, the free flow of public good knowledge has been vectored by a new system of status creation. Universities and higher education institutions have now turned to the creation of status. The system of rankings and of research and results metrics. These systems assign values to various knowledge packets and organize them in orderly patterns. Structured, siloized knowledge has become the norm of institutions of higher learning. The global environment, take note, I'm drawing you back to the initial definition or explanation that I gave about globalization. Now I'm showing you the role of globalization and what it is doing to the practices in higher education. I said the global environment of global rivalry and investment in innovation explains why nations compare themselves in terms of the knowledge economy, just as they do in terms of economic growth rates and other indices. However, it does not explain the origins of the specific comparison mechanisms, university rankings, league tables, and research performance measures. Yet another level, massification of higher education. The widening participation initiatives aim to improve access to higher education opportunities for all people, driven by the increased demand for education from all segments of society, as well as legal reforms and human rights declarations. These initiatives focus on improving access for students from historically marginalized backgrounds, for example, ethnic minorities, students with disabilities, students from low-income backgrounds, to address inequities and inequalities in higher education. In addition to globalization, democratization, and lifelong learning, inclusion and diversity in higher education has been greatly influenced by mass social movements. For instance, civil rights, women's rights, indigenous rights, as well as legal reforms and human rights declarations. For example, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Given these rights that are available to us, Africa has not been saved from the global appetite for the massification of African higher education. Massification in this case being the process by which academic systems enroll large numbers in higher proportions of the relevant age group of students in a range of differentiated academic institutions. This is normally done in pursuit of UNESCO goal of an inclusive education as a process of addressing and responding to the diversity of needs of all children, all youth, and adults through increasing participation in learning, cultures, and communities, and reducing and eliminating exclusion within and from education. Inclusion in education is rooted deeply in the democratic principles of justice and equal opportunity. Conversely, inclusive higher education is vital to the ongoing development of a democratic society. At the heart of inclusion is the cultivation of a mindset that supports growth and respects human differences. Hence, there is no country the world over, Africa included, that is immune from the pressure for massification, including countries that until recently have had a small and elitist academic system that faces pressure for expansion. The pressure to expand enrollments and provide access to wider segments of population can be observed everywhere, including African higher education. But such developments are more the result of the realities within nations and societies that dictated the international agencies and dominant economic powers. It can be argued that the World Bank and its related agencies have pressed an agenda that includes increased private funding for higher education propelled by their overall economic perspective, but the paucity of funding at the national level is of even greater importance. In other words, despite the need and the appetite to increase the provision of educational facilities, funding to support the increased numbers is not matched the demand that the numbers would be asking for. Such developments as differentiated academic systems, public-private mix, charging tuition for study, accreditation systems and the like are all necessary adjustments to increased access and mass higher education. Promoting and fostering inclusion means engaging all students in all aspects of educational processes, promoting collaboration and interacting and providing opportunities for all to succeed. However, it is a truism that massification has contributed to the deterioration of quality. The reckless growth of self-financing private colleges has resulted in a proliferation of institutions with poor infrastructure, less qualified teachers, and no research facilities, including the awarding of fake degrees and certificates. Yet another level. African higher education, academic freedom, and staffing conditions. Universities are not merely rarefied havens of refined culture, they are also areas of pervasive insecurity and open exploitation. In other words, various institutions outside the university find or converge at universities and institutions of higher learning to exercise and impose their authority on them in order to influence the thinking that prevails in such institutions. Hence, the complicity of well-placed, well-paid personnel in the highest levels of university hierarchies enables insecure situations of many early career and sessional academics. In other words, there is discord within higher education institutions. Discord between elite professors and emerging scholars, and such a discord does not provide harmony in the provision of service of teaching and learning. Deals with research stars who seek special conditions above the market pay, light research loads, and a war chest of research funds are frequently signed without debate with the rank and file of academics. Hind negotiations are made, so much that there are disparities between senior academics and emerging scholars. This has caused discord, especially in Africa. They promote a polarized and stratified culture of education. The academic profession has lost some of its power and autonomy within institutions. I have known a country in my background. I have known a country in my background where even the appointment for senior positions is done from political circles without taking into consideration the merit of individual appointees. And in institutions, they influence or maybe ranks such as deans, directors, vice chancellors, and deputy chancellors. You have to go through some process of vetting where security is involved, just to make sure that there is a a settlement to ensure that there is authority of government in institutions of higher learning. But remember, institutions of higher learning are places where open-mindedness is highly encouraged. I am limited to time. I'll skip some of the ideas that I raised, but I want to move on to the next layer, where I want to talk about the colonial university in Africa. Do we have an African university, or we are running colonial universities in Africa in the 21st century? The continent of Africa has been in contact with Western civilizations for more than a century. First was the slave trade, followed by colonization, and then so-called decolonization. Like Asia and America, Africa has been on the Western invented track of development, where all that which is referred to as development is defined from a Western-centric kind of thinking. And as a result, the kind of thinking that Africa or African higher education is persuaded to follow is Western-centric. And to that end, the way in which universities and higher education institutions handle knowledge investment comes closely to being a liability as far as business interests are concerned. Our universities have generally not adapted to the economic challenges facing Africa. Instead, they pursue the interests of the West. The impact of the West is being felt many, many years after independence. And as Momoni once said, post-colonial education in Black Africa is essentially a colonial legacy. After the overthrow of colonial regimes, colonial education systems in Africa were merely replaced by those which, although satisfying the aspirations of many educational reforms, conformed to a large extent to the system in the colonial country. It was the avowed policy of colonial governments to make education in their dependencies similar to those at home as a means of depersonalizing the Africans, and for paternalistic and assimilationist reasons. It was also an attempt to limit the number of intermediate and top-level African cadres. But why is it that, despite all these observations, the Western notion of university has been adopted virtually worldwide? Why don't you have an African way of understanding what universities are? I want to take you to another level for purpose of time. What is the place of the African university in the decolonial era? Although the common belief is that the university is public, universities cannot solve the problems in society or even teach about all of them. In some instances, universities in Africa inherit remnants of issues that should have been remedied earlier on. Universities are custodians of well-networked scholars with knowledge, skills, and access domiciled in the university community. Hence, the need for society to fully utilize all these resources to propel change. Our African universities must be seen as agents that propel change and development. I'll share some of the scripts that I have in my thinking, but I want to proceed by way of concluding by saying, do we need to have African world-class universities. The notion of the pursuit for African universities and competitiveness, which many universities, including my alma mater, which always refers to itself as a world-class research university in Africa, another institution that refers to itself as a world-class African university, and yet another, I'll not mention them by names, yet another, an international university of choice. Where do they make reference to Africa? They exclude Africa, they want to be world-class. But are they serving the challenges of the African continent? In some, colleagues, I would like to say the following. I'm a philosopher, unfortunately. I will continue speaking until the end of the day. But I just want to conclude by saying the following. One, that, just one moment. One moment. What kind of a university graduate, what kind of a higher education graduate do we expect from institutions of higher learning? One East African called Julius Kikonyo Wakiano in 1952 once said, when you say someone is an educated African, you mean that he is aware of the problems of his people, that he knows his culture well enough to be able to discriminate between its drawbacks and its advantages, that he can take the land his people have, the livestock his people keep, the wisdom of his elders, and the customs of his people, and integrate all this with the Western knowledge and techniques to help to build a progressive African community. Colleagues, I'm challenged for time. I would have spent the whole day with you, but I would like to conclude by saying, in the month, at the end of the month of Africa, are we as higher education institutions, are we as academic leaders, are we as students foregrounding the African background and the African needs before taking ourselves to the global platform? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. You can take a seat. Thank you so much, Prof. Amasa. That was quite, it made me think. There was a point when I was sitting here and I was like, African University or, But thank you so much for actually engaging us and leaving us with the call really to say what is an African university and if the universities are actually serving the African child and solving the problems faced by Africans. So I will then hand over to my colleague Uvuyo Ndodana to introduce our two respondents for today's topic.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Good morning. Molweni. Amandla. Awethu. Amandla. Awethu. Thank you very much. My name is Vuyo Ndodana. I am an engagement intern at CANRAD, and it is I'm very privileged to be standing in front of you. So I have a very simple duty and a very simple task, which is to introduce the respondents that are going to be giving an input on the presentation by Prof. Awasa. So the first respondent is going to be Dr. Walter Donubia, who is a lecturer at the Nelson Mandela University in the Department of Education. He has a PhD in education and is a staunch Pan-Africanist. Outside of being a producer of knowledge and mind shaper, he is also actively involved in community research in different spheres, which include psychology, philosophy, and sociology. He has vast experience in the education sector and has contributed immensely and has come from 3 different universities, including UNISA, UKZN, and UNIZUL. And then for our second respondent, we have Dr. Nehemiah Latola, who holds a PhD in chemistry and is the current project leader of Global African Footprint Expansion at the International Office at Nelson Mandela University. Dr. Latola is also a postdoctoral fellow in the chemistry department, where his research interests are in psychochemistry of medicinal plants. That's a mouthful. So we're going to call up on the first respondent, Dr. Walter Nubia, and he's going to take the podium, and then Dr. Nehemiah is going to follow thereafter. Thank you very much.
All right, can you guys hear me? Okay, good afternoon. Okay, I think I'm on the spot now after listening to Prof. And how do you respond to, Prof, can I call you an elitist researcher? Because when you criticize elitist research in Africa, and I was like, Doc, is he not one of them? Because being an NRF C-rated researcher, you don't just get up in the morning and be one. So permit us call you an elitist researcher. Okay, I'm here to represent my faculty, and I hope I will do justice to that without taking much of your time before I get bullied off the stage. I will just respond briefly to what Prof said, and I will say the positive and keep some of the negatives. Maybe you forgive me for the generational gap. I like how Prof engaged with globalization and how he brings in the global forces at play before getting into higher education. And by saying so, I think Prof stick to the script, so which is not what I'm going to do. I'll try as much as possible not to. But he later on got into the knowledge economy, and let me give you guys some context why Prof said so and why I'm trying to take my time to explain that. Over the years, probably if you believe creation or evolution, humanity have always tried to fight against some sort of inequality. And in that process of fighting against inequality, before globalization, we had some nation states, and that led to First and Second World War. I call it World War. So globalization was looked as a solution to humanity. If you want to understand this, you can read the work of Piketty, okay, Thomas Piketty. He talks about a brief history of equality, human equality. And that is where we find ourselves today, to understand what globalization means and why it is playing this role in our lives. I think Piketty also talked about we have reached that stage where some people call it late capitalism, some people call it, I don't know what other names they have it, but there's this notion that we need to start theorizing our next reality. And it's very important that African universities play a more active role or higher education that they have done historically. So that is where I'll probably start. Now, how do we get universities into all of this, or higher education institutions? I will start by looking at the work of a French philosopher called Jacques Lacan. I'm sorry, I'm talking about African, I'm going to a French philosopher. But he talks about power relations in the world. And he explained that there are four main discourses that shape and define our power relation in the world. He talks about the discourse of the master. We all have a master as we sit here. And the master presently is capitalism. Of investors, you hear of the rand going up and down and all of those things. Those are the master's reaction to whatever happened in any geographic context that you find yourself. And so that is the master that influences what we do at higher education. Now, if you look at the second discourse of Lacan, Lacan refers to the discourse of the university. Whether we like it or not, universities will always produce the knowledge that suits the value system of the master. Back in the Dark Ages, long before all of our grandparents were born, the master was Christianity, and universities produce knowledge like that. And you can see, for those of you that are old enough, like myself, you know that during the apartheid regime, universities produce knowledge that... You want to change it? Thank you. Okay, fine. So, universities tend to produce knowledge for the master, just to make sure what you call the status quo. So, and I think that's where Prof anchored every conversation that he was saying. And whatever he scaffolded there onward was to explain to us the parameters under which the master's discourse influence and shape universities in Africa. So from that, I will start with Prof. Please, Prof, forgive me if I have the wrong script because I noticed that you edited what I had. Okay, Prof made some few premises which I'm okay with them, but I had a problem with the first one. I don't know if Prof was actually referring to the ideal or an aspiration of African universities when he talked about, the first one talks about higher education plays a vital role in helping Africa develop an international competitive economy, which is his premise that fall within capitalism. But the next part says, a more prosperous and equitable society and a stable democracy. I don't think our universities have achieved that. It seems to be a situation where there are some people, I think Prof. Gomezulu will talk about this, I think the situation is getting worse, right? So if we have to say that is what universities do, then I don't think it's an argument for the university. To some extent, it might be an ideal and not the real. So then the next point, I'm fine with the other ones. The last one, you talked about contested spaces, which I fully agree with that. From a curriculum perspective, it's something we grapple with every day. And maybe I'll have the time, if I'm not bullied off the stage, to discuss some of those things. Then Prof got into globalization. Whether we like it or not, I think we'll have to deal with that for now, until whatever happens in Russia, Ukraine, or whatever happens in Africa or somewhere. But it's not here to stay, but it currently exists. And he alluded to the way we refer to universities today, and it's true. He talks about commercialization of learning, entrepreneurial university, market-oriented universities, and consumer university. African universities are embracing it. And if you look at the fees must fall movement, to some extent, the notion of inequality was forgotten. And we had to move with profit and all of those things. Now, my question that I had here was, and all universities, before I ask the question, we are in an era of neoliberal universities. And he referred a lot to public good. So most of the things I'll ask will relate to public good. My question here is, can a neoliberal university deliver on a public good? I think later on in my explanation or my response, I think there's also a false dichotomy between private and public. So I'll explain that when I get to that stage. So that's the question I'm asking there. Can a neoliberal university? I think they can, but he talks about the ever desire for profit actually overshadows that. Then the next thing is that, let me just get my script right. Okay, ICT. It talks about technology. I really don't have a problem with what Prof talked about technology. I just have a concern that he seemed to have, I say this with all respect, he seemed to have understood the African university and students as consumers of the product of technology and not necessarily interrogating the technology itself if it speaks to the African. And my question here is, how does technology understand us as Africans? Who is the human behind the thinking of the engineer? Is it an African human or a Western human? There's actually a difference. And that's a tough one. So the African human, even in a sense of music or in a sense of leisure or in an environment, we seem to, does technology really understand who that African is? And if, should we follow Prof's direction, are we not somewhere, somehow, in the near 50 years, achieve the same place we are that we were 50 years ago? Because technology now becomes that avenue where we are being assimilated, inculturated through that Western technology. So I think it's something we need to think about and ask, who is that African human behind the designing of technology? But also there are loopholes. If you look at ChatGPT, I wouldn't have escaped this one. I think our understanding of human, this is just an example to let you at least have some validity to my question. Our understanding of human and Bloom's taxonomy was that creativity was the highest form of human evaluation. But now, or assessment, sorry, but now ChatGPT seems to be very creative. So how do we evaluate that? They don't have the ability to evaluate certain things like we do. So those are the things that technology, to some extent, need to work on, but do they still have an African in mind within an African university? All right. Then the next thing Prof talked about is public good. Is it time now? Really? Okay. The next thing Prof talked about is public good. And with the public good, I had just, public good in itself comes with tension. And you can see that at university. We have a system of reward and punishment. The more you publish, the more you become an elitist researcher. The less you publish, you become me. So, and so, how do we escape that punishment and reward system, which is a neoliberal system, and we are talking about public good? In itself is very contentious. And then the next thing I want to ask is, can we have public without private? That is the first dichotomy. And can we have private without public? They are, maybe, our understanding of public and private good. You're a philosopher, I'm sure you deal with it. Our understanding of public and private good, maybe it's coming from the reward that we get from it. And maybe certain social welfare programs that may not be driven by profit, can actually be where we anchor and not necessarily the notion of private and public good. So, because of time again, then I'll just go to massification. I think massification will work best for Africa. We need more education. I understand the problem of quality and certification you talk about, which some people think the more certificates we give, the more we are educating it, and then we act surprised when things don't go the way we expect. I'm for quality. I actually studied qualities of PhD in my PhD, so I know what I'm talking about. So, and then I also think that one of the things that neoliberal societies are doing is to overpopulate the market for skills, because education, we don't talk again about knowledge, we talk about skills. And when you have the skills, it's to render a particular service to the economy. So, sorry? Not exactly. Okay, the next thing is, I want us to ask about academic freedom and staffing. Are we really free? Is there anyone from CHE here? Council of Higher Education? Maggie, I know you, I trust you. But somewhere, somehow, CHE is here with the way we do our reporting. I'm sure you must have read the work about Michel Foucault and the Panopticon and how they observe us. We are an object of observation without communication. So CHE is here. I don't think academic freedom exists. Somewhere, somehow, there's censorship. We have to, I think in education, most teachers fill a lot of forms to show that they are doing something, and you're always being evaluated. So the notion of academic freedom for me doesn't stand. And then the next thing is, let me see. Oh, colonial university. I think the problem with African colonial universities is that we have assimilated Western knowledge system. We have made a mistake where we think, for me, the notion of Western knowledge is a problem. Those are two things. One is Western and one is knowledge. If you're able to separate the epistemology from the ontology, that means the nature of reality and the nature of knowledge, then you can. Natural sciences doesn't exist in Europe. It doesn't take, if that was the case, you wouldn't have a plane flying in Africa. Not so. So to some extent, we have unconsciously accepted a false assimilation without necessarily realizing that this is a combination of two different things. And if you have to separate an African university like Prof have been talking about, we have to go into such things and separate what speaks to knowledge and what speaks to the context and what is our reality. The reason why African universities are the way they are and probably going to stay there is because we have not theorized our reality enough. We publish papers for the same neoliberal reasons, probably to become elite professors, and probably, but so we, in as much as we do that, because the punishment and reward system still force us to go to that direction. And up until that time where we sit down and ask ourselves, is this what an African university ought to be? We all know what is happening at universities. I don't want to repeat them. We have UNISA, we have Fort Hare, and all of those things. And Fort Hare used to be their university. Most African universities had independence with one or zero university. Around the 1960s, it was Ghana that had the highest. I think it's 3. South Africa had 30-something. So there was a wealth of knowledge, and it's disturbing that they tend to have internalized the neoliberal canons, and then we have been corrupted by those financial values. So, do I still have time? In conclusion. All right. In conclusion, I'll just go to my possible solutions, which Prof didn't get to. But besides that, I think for me, I'm sorry, guys. I had a lot of things to say, just like Prof, but I'll have to rush over it. We have a bully just next to us. And in conclusion, I think we need to look into Ubuntu. Ubuntu have three key elements: the human, the environment, and the spiritual part of it. And when they talk about the age of Anthropocene, or we are going green, is it not the environmental part of Ubuntu? They'll use fancy words and they'll repackage it just like they got resources and repackage it and brought it back to us. It's the same thing. They'll probably, and our African spirituality, I don't want to change this to whatever spiritual group, but there's also something around there, and because of time, I'll leave that. And also, we have, we need to be more organized in our knowledge system. Prof talked a lot about that when he talked about African Union, when he started the conversation. We need to have more philosophers who can really theorize that reality and engage with them in a way that, because one of the things we don't understand is that colonialism was sustainable not because they were here, but because they theorized knowledge that they had, they left it at the university. And if we don't start theorizing that, I've read a lot of things about decolonization. To some extent, I stopped reading them because I see recolonization happening. Honestly, it's happening. We are not seeing. You think the colonizer will just allow you to talk about decolonization and say, come on, okay, it's fine? They have to. And they are recolonizing and repackaging it. I would have explained some of those things that I wrote them down. But yeah, so if, in conclusion now, finally, if African universities want to recolonize themselves, they need to write their own stories. To some extent, we have complained for too long. We have analyzed the problems for too long. And we have stayed there. Look at life orientation. Is it orientating? Why do we assess them academically? By writing. Nobody cares. Even university don't care. So why do we stick there? So I will leave it at that. Prof, I think, for the sake of peace. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. So without wasting any time, I'm going to call upon our second respondent, Dr. Nehemiah. Give him a round of applause.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Responses are weird to me as someone who comes from a science background where response to someone's life work would seem insulting. So I struggle with the concept of response, but maybe before I get to why I'm actually here, to comment on the conversation that me and my colleague had about the elitist or the elite professor in the educational system trying to work through it or tell us about it. I think education thinking in the critical paradigm, as I would like to see myself as a critical scholar, even though I find myself in science, thinking through that, I think that being in higher education is the process of undoing it. So as you achieve and you become this elite in this context, you are undoing as you go. So I think I think, Prof, you see yourself as undoing some of those challenges. That would be my contribution. So firstly, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to form part of the thought here and to contribute around higher education in Africa. Today, mine is very simple and very short. Me and my colleague did a tag team. He would respond to the text and I would respond to what Nelson Mandela University is doing or trying to do in the international office with looking at education, higher education in Africa. So I will be talking from that perspective today. So from a partnership, so in the international office as the project leader of the African expansion footprint. We work on partnerships and engagement at Nelson Mandela University, and I want to tell you a bit about that. So from a partnerships perspective, we have developed a proposal by which we work that is the expansion of our African footprint, which proposes a plan that for the expansion of the Nelson Mandela University's African engagements and partnerships, right? The purpose of this is to mark a strategic thrust for the university's reimagining internationalization approach, and one that places the African continent at the center of its internationalization imperatives. I know that we've just talked about the commodification of education, and here I am, a pundit of the Nelson Mandela University. This effort was directed, of course, through a response to our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sibongile Mutwa's call for the re-envisaging, I hope I got that right. I have a speech impediment, so it's difficult to get certain words right, of the university's internationalization agenda in a way that would enable a clear articulation of the university's stance with respect to what Nelson Mandela University stands for. And we purport a lot that we stand for. And so our engagements are guided by that. We call ourselves a cutting edge university in service of society. That's part of our our purporting, and when you engage with other universities, it's helpful to remember that, but also to remember the values that we uphold and the values that we purport, and how then do we take that forward. This is an internationalization that is Africa-centered, it is transformational, it is transformative, and it aims to retrace Dr. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela's 1962 travels through Africa for support and aid during the then apartheid regime. So that is what we stand for. I'd like to talk about our challenges in higher education, some of the ground challenges that we may encounter in our office, but also as a university. And I think pivotal to that is the issue of student enrollment, the funding associated with that. When we talk about this growing knowledge, having to have more people being qualified from the institution, there's of course funding involved in that. And I think the colleagues also touched on the issue of research, and not only research, but also the quality of that research. And these are challenges that we face. We have taken the stance to try and solve some of these issues through being Africa-centered and working with our African partners. But however, we are not immune to these challenges that are raised. I'm sure we all are from the African continent, or know about the African continent, know the socio-economic issues that we face. We spoke about the imposition of a coloniality and the after effects that had. In South Africa, we had our special dose of apartheid as well. So there are many challenges and flaws that governs this interaction between universities in Africa, which really require support. Some of the ways in which the international offices try to approach this, because South Africa is one of the African countries that is seen, especially when you make the proclamation that I am here to partner with you, it seems as if you can't come empty-handed to the table, right? And so one of and how our university, we have affectionately named our university as the No Money University. Of course, that's not true. It's just how we affectionately refer to the acronym. But a way in which we've tried to do this is by leveraging bilateral consortium agreement partnerships. I can think two of, in my time here, that we are currently working on is an indigenous knowledge system partnership, which incorporates South Africa, it incorporates Zimbabwe and Lesotho, multiple universities from South Africa, Zimbabwe and Lesotho coming together in a consortium agreement around the area of mobility of students staff in these areas of indigenous knowledge. And I think that's especially important, not only because my research is aligned to that in working with natural products, but also because I think a lot of our challenges that we face in society, we've heard that we tend to fix European problems. And by looking into our indigenous knowledge systems and looking at the knowledge and the problems that persist, we will find that we'll be at a more leverage point to actually address African problems and find solutions to these. I do it, but in a small part of indigenous medicines, but there's various other indigenous knowledge systems that can address serious issues that we face as societies. Another funding scheme that we have identified is, of course, a European one, the Intra-Africa Funding Scheme that operates and currently looking at climate change as a focus of that funding system. We are partnering with a managing university, Oldenburg, one of our oldest partners of Nelson Mandela University. We're celebrating 25 years of partnership this year. And South Africa being the administrator with universities from Kenya, Uganda, Benin, and Tanzania. We're working on a proposal to work around the issue, again, of student mobility, of staff, of internships, of knowledge exchange, of course, governed by this core of quality of the education and quality of the engagement. I think higher education now is also facing, when I step away from this and maybe making concluding remarks, higher education is also facing a hiatus of academic staff, which we are also going to have to consider. The current immigration or visa regulations of South Africa has seen a large exit of expertise in various fields where experts' visas weren't renewed. And from a country's perspective, you can understand that, but you must also then ask, do we have the quality in place, and do we do the right work to identify that quality to be there? I think we also are faced with the issue of this. We have to produce in order not to perish in higher education, right? You are only as good as how many papers you have published, right? You know, there's all of these considerations to make. And we've seen a huge movement on social media of Alcevas. Alcevas have been purported to have a highest income than Amazon. And Amazon is a global product selling, and you ask yourself, how is it that a journal, a publisher that hosts journals is making more than businesses out there in return? And you find that the answer is very simple. You have academics pouring their life's work into this journal with no compensation. And in that, they pay fees to have your work published in that journal. In turn, there are editorial bodies that do the work for little to no profit. We've seen in the neuroimaging journals at Alcevas, the entire boards of 2 journals, they flat out stood up and said that this is not logical, this can't stand. So those 2 journals are probably scurrying for new editorial boards. We are seeing a move to open access, but what does that mean? And doesn't it mean we pay more now to have our documents open access? Because journals need running costs, but how do we do that equitably? I was sitting in my office as a postdoctoral candidate. I was sitting with a journal article, and I was looking at how am I going to publish this journal article after it got rejected, which I won't get into, by one journal article. And I'm looking for a new article to publish this journal in, and all of them charge 500 or 5,000 US dollars. And do you just want to know what that cost in South Africa? About 92,000 rand to publish one article in a journal. This is heinous, and we need to ask ourselves then, what does that mean for knowledge production? Does that mean that only the elite have a voice? Does that mean that if you don't have money? Because there's also certain regulations that try to have lists. There are 2 sets of lists of countries that completely don't pay that fund, and there's also countries that pay partially that amount of money to publish these articles. But South Africa is not in that list. South Africa is somehow seen as a country that is sustainable, that researchers can pay this 92,000 rand per article. And that is just not the reality of things. So you find we have to debase ourselves as researchers, write the board of editors, I have no funding to publish this. Can you please find it in your heart of hearts in the name of Jesus Christ to publish this journal article? Like it's ludicrous. And we think, what does that mean for social and equitable engagement? What does that mean for justice? So in conclusion, I want to say that successfully addressing some of these challenges that we have are not going to require a liminal approach. We're going to need multiple approaches to fix these problems. I constantly have discussions with a friend of mine who is a bit younger than me, and so we always have these discussions where we engage in debate, and then I constantly have to remind him that but multiple things can be true at the same time. We can't reach a space in the society where only one thing can be true, So there are multiple ways of solving one problem. And so I think it needs a regional, it needs an international commitment by stakeholders to walk towards solving these issues. And I'm just happy to be a part of this discussion. And I hope that I can continue to think through it with some of my esteemed colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. This is the respondents are done. So now we are going to, I literally have one of the most difficult tasks today, which is program directing, because now you have to tell people, stand up, sit down, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then they are calling me a bully. Me, I'm hurt, guys. But it's just literally the name of the game. It's not me. Don't blame me. I'm sorry. So with that now being said, I would like to introduce the facilitator that will be facilitating the student discussion and the roundtable discussion, which is the part that I was actually looking forward to. Thank you. Over to Nhlakanipho Mahlangu.
Thank you, everyone. Before we start, I'd like our roundtable discussants to please come up and take a seat so that when we introduce you, you can wave and we know exactly who we're talking to. I think 2 of you will be able to sit on this side. It's just, I think 2 of you sit that side, and then there we go. All right, before I begin, I'm going to ask my colleague Uvuyo to introduce our discussants, and then we will introduce this side of the program.
Thank you once again, colleagues. I think we've reached the point that we've all been waiting for, which is the Q&A session, as well as the discussing of the content that has been shared amongst us. So I see that they are not sitting in the order that I would have preferred, but nonetheless, on my right, we have Edmilson Pino, who is a student, who was a recent graduate with a Bachelor of Engineering Technology in Industrial Engineering and currently doing his honors degree. He has experience in leadership and mentorship roles, including mental health and well-being mentorship for the Campus Key student community and operations mentor for the Campus Key student community. He is a recipient of the Nelson Mandela University Merit Bursary Award, and he's done that twice. He is a member of the Golden Key International Honor Society and the DHL Grad Star Top Awards 500. I think that deserves a round of applause. He is a highly creative and independent learner who is interested in the economy, technology advancements, as well as Industry 4.0, and he is continuously expanding his skills through self-study and discourse. That is Edmilson Pino. Please give him a round of applause. And then on my immediate left, we have Umwayi Prudence Msokera, who is a 20, okay, who is a 2023 Mandela Rhodes Scholar who is doing a postgraduate studies in Nelson Mandela University. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Malawi and has been trained to be a certified professional in healthcare quality by the National Association for Healthcare Quality Assurance. She is also an alumnus of the Young African Leadership Initiative, South Africa. I'm also a part of that, by the way, just mentioning that. Before pursuing her postgraduate degree, Ms. Msokera worked as a quality management officer, supporting quality improvement interventions in the healthcare sector. As QMO, she has coordinated the development of Malawi's first health facility accreditation policy roadmap and the development of national quality of care standards. Mwai previously worked as Deputy National Coordinator, leading an award-winning social enterprise, the Maestros Leadership Team, which has reached over 30,000 people across several project streams. That is Mr. Mwai Msokera, ladies and gentlemen, on my immediate left. And then on my right, we have Mr. Michael Chindora, who is the President of International Student Society. Michael Chindora is an aspiring electrical engineer currently studying at Nelson Mandela University. He is a chairperson of the International Student Society and an entrepreneur with a startup specializing in industrial maintenance. In his free time, Michael enjoys hiking and fishing. Ladies and gentlemen, those are our three panelists who will be discussing the contents of today. Thank you very much.
Okay, while they deal with the setup, this part of the program is where we get to do our favorite thing, which is discuss everything that has been put before us today. The discussants here today have been invited to present their own reflections as students and as, I believe, the custodians of what an African university or a dynamic African university, which is what Nelson Mandela University aspires to be, is all about, right? So I'm going to hand over to each one of them to present their own brief reflections, not just on the presentations here today, but also on your own experiences as students at Nelson Mandela University. So I'm going to start with Michael. Marco is the picture, right? Thank you. Michael, over to you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Chidora. I'd like to say to everyone, Happy Africa Month. And my motto will still go as it, let's preserve our culture and heritage. A lot has been said in our discussion today, but I'm a person who likes to keep it to the basics. Gen Z, millennials, Gen Alpha, this is on us to preserve our African culture, because everything that has been noted and said, all that has been said is going to sprout from us being a people with pride. So I was given a topic as the president of the International Society based on my experiences as an international student, and I'll be specific to this institution, Nelson Mandela University. And I'm in agreement with what was stated the most, because I will say, just like what Prof. Amasa said, there's a disparity between our senior students and entry-level academics. So, as why I'm saying this is access to the basics, regardless of nationality. Students have the same problems, and this is a song I believe everyone is tired of singing. Accommodation, funding, good health care. This does not look at nationality, but it affects the international students more because we have less supporting structures. So I will say this, and I really appreciate the international office. They have this in motion, trying to cover this up because of the problems that are being faced. I will say postgrad students, international students, their experience, their journey is way more eased because they have more supporting systems. So all I can say is in a way to address this challenge, I will say, why doesn't that same system and implementations be mirrored as well for undergrad students, so that we have our own view as an African university. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Michael. Moira. Excuse me, it is in my notes, Mwai. I'm so sorry. I think you've been given several names today. I'm sorry. Mwai.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mwai Msokera. And well, I've done my undergrad in Malawi and now doing my postgrad here in Nelson Mandela University. And initially, I studied political science, and then now I'm doing political and conflict studies. And basically, the stories that were shared by students studying political science in Malawi are the same stories that I hear here at NMU. And for our course, it's basically what are we going to do after we finish studying? Because usually people will think a political scientist will amount to being a politician, or you will basically be a political. You will go into politics, basically. You've just been put in a box to be those two. But that's not true. And for me, I see that it's a problem that the same story, the same narrative in Malawi is being met here in South Africa, that political scientists or political science students don't know what to do after they finish graduating. And I feel like universities should be able to marry theory and practice. I'm going to give an example of economics. I've done a bit of economics, and you know how if you're solving problems in economics, you will always have to hold things constant. I don't know if there are any economics students. But when you're doing something, it's you have to hold, your assumption will be when all things are held constant. But the reality of the world is nothing is constant, everything is moving. So how do you now train up an economist who shows up in the world and solves problems of the real world? They move from theory. And I like what Prof said, that education has been put in silos. We want an education system where if you're a political scientist, it only shows that you're capable of learning, but that's not what you're limited to doing. If you are an engineer, that's not what you're only limited to doing. You go up and show up in the world, and you can solve problems with the socioeconomic realities of your country. I don't know if that's making sense. But for me, I just would want universities that help students to marry theory and practice and help people to show up in the world to be problem solvers. I mean, I've done political science, and I later on worked in the health sector, and just having people be so surprised that how are you a political scientist and you're working in the health sector? Every time I was in a meeting, everybody didn't believe that it was possible. But you know, it comes with learning that you can blend these disciplines. You can blend political science and economics and health and come up with a solution. Yeah, so that's what I had to say. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mwaye. And Edmilson.
Okay, it's on now. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Edmilson Pino, and I am a graduate from the Industrial Engineering Department here at Nelson Mandela University. But I'm honored to be here. First, I want to thank the organization and the panel. It's always good to be sharing different views, especially when there are different generations involved. How can I describe my journey? My journey is a bit interesting because I have a mechanical engineering background, but then I decided to do industrial engineering. So because I believed, and I still do believe, that the world does not need advanced technology as we are led to believe that it needs. When you go overseas and you experience what is called the first world, westernized countries, you will realize that it's a bunch of old infrastructure that is being optimized to the best operational level. Old train stations, old buildings, old hospitals, all optimized to their best. So I thought to myself, why am I studying design engineering to build machines when in Africa we have lots of machines, but all that we do not have is the basic. We don't have water, we don't have electricity, and we don't have optimal operating systems. Therefore, studying industrial engineering was the only option, since we design systems and optimize them to their best operational point, not just in an operational point of view, but in a systems point of view. When I link that to what is an African university, I think it's a university that develops a framework that is continuously measuring the gap that exists between the expectations of the workforce, the market, that is the economy, which you're going to talk about capitalism and everything, which I believe that everything is important for the development of society, but also that gap and the expectations of scholars and universities to create a self-regulating system that will ultimately drive the intent and the role of research and science in universities in Africa. If we look, for example, at MIT, it's a great example. You see Western universities create a lot of value for their societies, and you're going to see that the likes of Skype and many other technologies that we use today come out from those universities. And if we apply the same concept of using our knowledge, our development within our universities to address these problems, then we will be marching towards an African university, not from an ideological perspective, but from a framework of self-regulation perspective, which uses the knowledge to solve our issues. Because our issues are not complex. We don't need to go ask ChatGPT to know what we need, because it's really simple. It's water, it's electricity, it's no potholes that are going to cause problems, simple things. Engineering that has been done for over 2 centuries. So I think this is my background. This is what I stand for. And I think after I'm done with my postgrad in industrial engineering, I'm pursuing health engineering sciences, because that's the best way to go. Because if we look at it, we have 2 big problems in Africa: food and health. Without those 2, we cannot have water, we cannot have electricity, we cannot have good engineering. So the best way to do that is to create optimal systems, and I think I can contribute greatly on that by researching, and not just researching, but putting myself in an economical and financial position to actually impact change. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Edmondson, and thank you all for your reflections on your experiences. I'm very fascinated by identity formation. It is my area, I wouldn't say of expertise, but it's the area I love to explore. And I'm fascinated by Michael defining himself as an international student while he is African in a dynamic African university. And these are some of the complex questions that I think we are grappling with as members of the university community. I think that I don't want to mess up Mwai's name. It's Mwai. I don't know why, it's not sticking. Mwai. I think one of the greatest challenges that we face as university students is this question of what is next, right? And I think that this question this question limits us so much that we are unable to think about what do we do now, right? And I think that I quite enjoyed Ed Milson's reflection as he talks about the simplicity of some of our needs and the simplicity of some of the things that we need to be looking into. And I want to ask this question of what do you feel, discussants, is our role as students? And I'm not talking about English. English will always fail you when you need it. I'm not talking about a distant, faraway student that we must imagine will come in 5-6 years to come. I'm talking about our role right now to address and to make sure that the university is fulfilling its role and is contending with its challenges. What are some of our roles as students? Before I open up the Q&A. I'll start with Ed Milson this time.
Okay, that's a very, I would say it's a multifaceted question because there is many ways of tackling that. But for me, I think students have to, before I answer the question, I'm going to give a background of how I'm going to, of why I'm going to answer the question in that manner, is that we have to fight, or we face various pressure points. We are experiencing various pressure points, and those pressure points are the work environment, the regulatory systems to which we're going to be part of as professionals. And all of these bodies have expectations from us. And usually it's hard because most of us are coming to university to change generational curses, to change the status quo of where we come from and where are we going to. And sometimes it's a bit hard to put that aside and put academia first. So I think that's the role of the student. It's to guide himself with the help of the framework, which is the university, and the regulatory systems, which are the professional bodies in the market. And in a way that we develop abilities that will allow us to be citizens of the continent, that will prepare the work, not really prepare in a sense of developing work, but prepare in a sense of being professionals that will be active and proactive in the development of society. So in that, all within an ethical point of view, because there is the ethical and moral point of view when it comes to us transitioning from education to the work environment. And I think that's the most important part, is to tailor that path in a way that we can develop, but also within that ethical and moral point of view. So that's our role as students, and I think that's the only way to add value to society.
Why?
Well, for me, I think I have a lot of answers, but the main one would have to be our role or our responsibility is to build ourselves. The university can't do everything, but it's my responsibility to build myself. I have to know what my weaknesses are and try to grow in those aspects. I remember just an example of one of my mentors had a birthday, his daughter's birthday party. Now the thing is, his daughter goes to a predominantly white school, so that meant we would have white parents and black parents. So I know the usual norm is that you have black people on the corner and white people on the corner. And he put us aside and he's like, I do not want to see any of you. Just, it was I think like 5 of us, any of you, just, going to that space where oh, that's where black people are, because that's the comfortable space. Push yourself to go and learn. Push yourself to go in that circle and interact. I know it's just natural instinct to go to places where it feels comfortable and safe, but don't be that type of person. You have to learn to stretch yourself and put yourself in environments that will grow you. Like, for example, right now, my research is in, again, I'm doing political and conflict studies, but my research is in South-to-South cooperations, exploring collaborative partnerships in the maternal and neonatal network quality of care. So I'm in political science, but I've driven myself to marry two disciplines: the health sector, what I was previously doing, and the political science sector. And I mean, I was trying to look for supervisors, and like a couple of people were like, no, but we've never really done this. We've never really had anyone do research in maternal and neonatal health. So I had like problems finding a supervisor, but I still found one. But I didn't restrict myself to doing what I know best. I didn't restrict myself to only focusing on political science and conflict issues. I went ahead and crossed the line and did not conform to the usual norm. So for me, I would say build yourself in any type of way. Your education, your personality, how you will show up in a room. Usually Malawians are known for being quiet. They don't ask questions. They really don't participate. You know what my mentor said? In that classroom, be the person that talks. Raise up your hand. So those are simple ways you can build yourself up. If you know you're a shy person, push yourself to do something that you normally wouldn't do. So it's your responsibility to build yourself up, to show up in a room and become a well-rounded individual. The institution, unfortunately, will not do that for you. Yeah.
Michael.
The roles I feel as students or the institution can assist the students and to bring the forwardness of our African education. And I'm gonna speak from experience, and I'm gonna echo what Ed Milson was saying. First of all, the harsh reality we need to look at is none of us have any hand skills left. And as he said, we're taking it back to the basics. Hand skills are very important. And I get very worried every time when I'm seeing FET colleges closing, most higher education institutions starting to phase out those kind of qualifications. But those are very important. I'm talking of things like your welding, your carpentry, things like your metalworks. I'm telling you, from those form of education I did metalwork at ordinary level. I'm still using that same skill set to do project for Transnet. I'm working with Anglo-America in session as well. So what I'm trying to say is, let's invest in hand skills. Yes, everything is theorized, but I think the solution is also up to us as well, as millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. Guys, let's use our hands. Let's use our hands, because everything is in the power of our hands as Africans. Thank you.
All right. Okay, in the spirit of all things Kenred, angazi nokuba uProf Ngomezulu uzawundibetha okanye uzawundiyeka. I want us to keep the spirit of this conversation. It's for all of us, it's a round table. We are all seated, except me, sorry. So I'm gonna ask for 3 burning questions from the floor. Oh, it's burning. 1, 2, 3. Done. Number 1.
Okay, thank you. My name is Osaboyen Clifford. I am an international student, as much as I'm African, but I don't feel African in my application. I feel international student, and every year I pay international student fees, the same as the foreign people. So as much as this is a dynamic African institution, I am international student here. So now my first question, Prof, is how do we move? You know, we can speak big grammar in this place, you know, and talk all these things. But how do we move from this ideological reasoning and thinking and theorizing and isms to praxis and policy within the university? Because I've been in this university since 2015, and all these policies, I've actually seen change for South Africans. But we keep using the word African, African, African. But is it really African or is it South African? Because funding is still 10% international students. And now actually international students can only get partial cost of their studies in terms of funding. So we're looking at the policies, right? And we every year would have international Africa Month, every year. But then these things we're speaking about here are not translating into praxis, they're not translating into policy. How is that going to happen? That's my first question. For Dr. Walter, you referenced the fees must fall movement and said inequality was forgotten. I don't know about that for international students. And then also your claim about the elitist notion of the university of how publishing, you know, leads to position. I disagree with that. I think it's connection that leads to position, because I have many PhD candidates that have published a lot, international quote students, but that did not result in any position anywhere unless they know somebody. And my final question, I can see I am taking time, is for Dr. Nehemiah. You said the Nelson Mandela University cutting edge in service to society. My question is, which society? Is it the South African society or is it African society? Because if it's South African society, then I know obviously my international fees are going to South African society and not necessarily the African society. Because the indigenous knowledge system project you spoke about, the countries you named are Southern African. And the intra-mobility funding, which I am very much part of, so I'm part of this criticism, is just South and East African. So we just throw the word African around, but actually we still very much functioning within the borders of the colonial people they gave to us. Thank you.
All right. Number 2.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Mine is just one. I'm just going to try.
Briefly.
Yes, very. I'm Obagin Kahula from the Faculty of Education. Mine is for Prof and Moy, because Moy spoke something very profound, speaking about praxis, to say, as universities, we are operating in silos, and how do we then practicalize these theories that the speakers have been engaging on? And amongst the participants here, I heard the gentleman speaking about, as I conclude this qualification going into the next, I am going to do engineering, whereas as Africa, we are faced with a challenge of education. Education as itself, it is in crisis. A few days ago in the faculty, we found out that an international study was conducted. So my question is, within an African context, what becomes of standards for us as Africans for education, and African-centered education that, or university that you're speaking about, Prof, to who will it be for? And what kind of education do we envisage to have within this African-centered university? Because currently they say children in grade 4 cannot read properly. So what does that mean for these universities that produce academics, that produce these engineers that cannot read or write? Therefore, what does it mean for an African child in the next decade? I'll pause there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Number 3.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shelton Chademana. I am an African international student at Nelson Mandela University. I'm currently doing my CTA, postgrad in accounting for chartered accountants. I'm also serving as an RSA for Soplag residents. I have a question to Prof. I agree that most of African universities, they are westernized. Then my questions to Prof and also the rest of the house is how then as emerging young men and women change this from westernized to Africanized university. And then my second question is on the issue of funding. In as much as we say or we advocate for education, we say African students must get learned, we transform the world. But in reality, universities, they've come more of profit perspective than the primary objective of disseminating education to every student. And now, it's now like a bottleneck. We're still operating in a bottleneck situation where those with money or those who can afford can still manage to get access to education, when we have students who are coming from poor backgrounds, but because of that they are disadvantaged, they cannot access education again. So again, my question to you is, what should we then do as Africans? I thank you.
All right. I'm going to hand back to the panel, and I would ask that we address the questions that have been asked, but also we wrap up and make our closing marks in the same breath. Ne? Prof. Ndoferepi, I will start with you.
Thank you very much, and I really enjoyed the questions, and from my disciplinary background, I enjoy engaging with questions that are especially challenging. The first response I want to make is that I, as a philosopher, I will not provide solutions. No wonder why even in my presentation, I never got to a point where I prescribed any solutions to the African challenges, but I will continue asking questions until I leave the room. So I just want to get to the issue of policies that are put in place which do not support international students. And the big question that the colleague asked is, where is our Africanness? If they exclude international students, then the same international students are by origin Africans. Yet they are excluded by governance issues of policy. Where is our Africanness? Like I promised you earlier on, I'll leave it at a question level. I will leave that at question level. I would like also to respond to a question that probed me into addressing the relationship between Western and African universities. No one can exactly prescribe how we can, as African universities, precisely can turn ourselves into our own identity, but we'll keep questioning and asking why we are disadvantaged vis-a-vis the Western notion of the university that we are copying. But all I'm trying to say is, time is now for us not to continue mimicking and aping Western universities and think the formation and structuring of our curricula, the structuring of our governance, the structuring of our systems of higher education based on African ways of doing things, which are not Western. However, we are persuaded to remain global and competitive. Thank you.
Dr. Walters.
Okay, thank you for that question. I think there are two questions. And when I say, in relation to the Feast Must Fall movement, when I say it was forgotten, I'm not saying it was out of memory. What I was actually alluding to is, to some extent, the way the system addressed problem pertaining to education. Inequality was not, addressing inequality was not at the center as it is today. I think we'll agree on that. And the Feast Must Fall asked very important question. You must have noticed that after that, we talked about decolonization of the curriculum, and universities don't talk about it very much. It ended there. So it's an issue of measurement, the extent to which it was forgotten, but in other words, it wasn't addressed. And I don't think that at the present moment, it is still being addressed. We are in an unequal society, probably not just in South Africa, but the rest of Africa, and within and compared to the rest of the world itself. So, and one of the reasons why it's like that, because we haven't applied enough thought on how to make it equal. It's not 50-50, it's how do we make it 100? And I think that is a gap. Maybe we'll need more people to solve it in a more practical way. And that's the my own response may be biased based on my own experience of being an international student. So I will try not to superimpose my experience to all of you, but I certainly have different view, and being a student, I agree with what the rest of the panelists said, that you have to take ownership of yourself. You have to be responsible. So, and that is it. Then the next part of the question that talks about publication, and I think you were unfair asking me sitting beside Prof. So, but I'll do justice to it. I don't think when you refer to connection, it's not the rule, it's an exception to some extent. We need to also exercise some fair level of criticism when we talk about one or two things. I think sometimes you submit a paper and it takes a while. I remember I submitted a paper and it took 2 months, and they came back to me. The correction was less than a page. I submitted, and then I waited for about 4 months, and I had to send the person an email. What is happening? They said I didn't approve my resubmission. And all along, I thought they were just, you get what I'm saying? And I just had to go and click approve. And it took me close to 5 months to do that. So sometimes I'll also try not to make it a rule. You get what I'm saying? Because especially when you deal with curriculum issues or qualitative research, we may talk about something today, and then I come back to you 1 month after and I ask you, you say something completely different, your experience changed. So keep the faith and don't make the exception become the rule.
Ed Milson, closing remarks.
I will address multiple questions at once, and I'll hope that each of one of you will eventually see your question answered. First, when it comes to education, and I also read the article of the children that it's not that they cannot read, they can read, but they cannot read to comprehend. And this is a problem across Africa, not just here in South Africa. And as for engineers, when I arrived at Nelson Mandela, I saw a lot of fancy labs and a lot of high tech. And I've realized that most of the problems that I was looking to solve within my knowledge gap didn't really go through that. So it's a matter of going from the policy to the action. When I spoke about a gap analysis of the system to create a self-regulatory framework, it's to allow us to see what are the expectations of the market, what are the expectations of the, then we can effectively develop solutions that are tailored for the situation. Because generalizing a problem only creates other problems. Because now we have more questions. Now we have, that's why research, it's a specific thing. When we try to research, one thing that I'm struggling to do is focus, create more focus on whatever I'm trying to do so that the solution is effective. It's like in the hospital. You get a medication that's going to treat a specific condition. And when it comes to international, I see myself in the international struggle, international student struggle, because I experienced two sides of the international student struggle. I lived with French, Spaniards, Americans, Germans, and all that. And I also lived with people from Malawi, Nigeria, every single country around Africa. And one thing I've noticed is the program for Western students, it's completely different. They go on tours, they go to know the city, they have programs to interact with South African society, like taking care of kids and doing all these things. But other African countries, myself coming from Angola, we also don't know the South African culture as per se. And we feel like outsiders as much as we Africans. And I think that's the major problem. It's seeing yourself as an active participant of society. Most of us do not see ourselves. Even on protests and everything, as much as I feel for students, I tend to not participate because I have to focus on my degree and get good results to make my parents happy and myself at the end of the day. So that's pretty much my view. And as for student responsibility, to wrap up, I think if you believe in something and you actively pursue it, I think everything is possible if you apply yourself to it and focus on the solution and not the problem. The problem will overwhelm you and the solution will help you get places. Thank you.
Thank you, Adnelson. Michael. Sorry. Okay, sure. I'll go by the line. Why?
Thank you all for the participation. And like I said, I like to keep things basic. All I've heard is an outcry for inclusivity from people across different boards. So, as I said before, all of this is because of policies that were put in place by people of a certain class, mostly the niche class. So the big question now is, we've been taking a democratic approach for inclusivity for a long time. And as we're here with our leaders and also with the upcoming generation, I'll leave you with the question: for how long can we continue taking this approach? Thank you.
Thank you. Why?
Sorry, are we supposed to respond
Just
to
closing
just
remarks?
closing
Yeah.
remarks? Okay, fine. I think I've said enough, but I just observed that I was the only female, and I would really like that next time we have more ladies representing. But to round it all up, to round up everything, I think I would like to say, in as much as it's possible to have a savior coming and like someone to help you with something that you're looking for, our reality for most of us is no one's going to come to save us. The government is not coming to save us. Scholarships are only offered to a few people. I think now it's time to sit down and say, if no one's coming, how am I going to save myself? Yeah.
And Dr. Nehemiah.
Wow.
Let's clap for her. I'm sorry about that.
I think this platform, I think I reiterate what the panelists have been saying, that there's been a cry for help. And I think the university needs to do some work around that. I will, in my capacity, forward these complaints. But to address the question about which society, I think your question relates to national and international relations and how we navigate those spheres. A simple question, a simple answer for that would be one that we got from the DVC of Transformation ETP, Prof. Andre Kiet, in our science engagements, where he said that if you ask the question of which society, you need to locate the university within a society. And when you locate the university is located in this society, but also then located in the Eastern Cape, which is located in South Africa, and then located in Southern Africa, and located in Africa and in the world. And it's up to you as a member of that society to decide then which issues take priority for you and for yourself and for your engagement. I think that's a simple, easy, not complicated, but you might need more context to answer your question. I do want to say that Benin is included in the intra-Africa. Benin is in West Africa. And maybe to preface that, the African Expansion Project began as a desire for the incumbent at the time, VC, Prof. Mutua, to strengthen and reimagine what we think international relations to be, or internationalization as an institution. And so you would not have had a concerted effort by the universities prior to that to engage Africa. Now, last year we had our inaugural Vice Chancellor visits in Africa, which visited East Africa. And so you will see the highlight in our interactions being in East Africa, and that was because that was our first visit. We formed many relationships and re-established existing relationships between Moore University, Makerere University, and the likes of those universities there in that visit. This year, we are currently working and planning the West African visit. So as the proposal projects that we are retracing the steps of Nelson Mandela University that he did in 1962 when he procured funds in aid. And so that is the vehicle by which we are doing this. Also, this is underpinned to quote Prof when he says there's layers and layers to this, this is also underpinned by the function or the role that the international office plays in the institution, right? The international office can only facilitate engagement, can only, from my perspective of partnerships, can only facilitate that engagement, but we require our research colleagues or our teaching colleagues to come with those proposals to us to say that we want to work here. Because we can identify and we alert colleagues in relevant fields, come and work on this, but we need willing and able researchers who are willing to do the work, to come to the table and take that up. So maybe a reformation of Africa in our researchers' minds are needed, because there is the bad connotation that if you have to go to Africa, they just want money. There's also that connotation which is very misguided and confused. Yeah, so yeah, I'm not an international student, but I've taken down some of your concerns here, and I will, like I said, forward it to the necessary places. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. And thank you to our panel. I am going to hand over to Professor Zulu, who will usher us into the next stage of our conversation. The discussants and the respondents can excuse us.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Can you give yourself a round of applause?
Thanks.
Yeah, we are now pressed for time. I'm no longer going to do what we plan to do with the Prof. Ndofrepi. All I can do now is just to say that we are now entering the last leg of our program. And then, of course, I'm not going to do any vote of thanks because we have a colleague of mine who will do it. That is Prof. Emma Shaimombe, who will do that later. For now, Prof. Ndofrepi will be leading us in the last part, which is the launch of the book. I have co-authored with him on a number of book series, including one of the volumes that is going to launch now, but I'm no longer going to talk to the paper that I wrote, which was about African universities finding an identity. In other words, reimagining an African university, which speaks to the issues that the panelists have been talking to. Yeah, Prof. Ndofrepi is just picking up something there, and when he comes back, he will then take us through this. But maybe while waiting for him, Mwai, where is Mwai? Yeah, no, your concern is genuine. In fact, in preparation for this, I had requested my colleagues to be mindful of the gender balance and then also of the racial balance. Yeah, they tried in vain. For some reason, they couldn't find people who were willing and able to take this particular stage. And I'm glad that you did. We really appreciate that. So going forward, that is basically what we'll try to do. Which will be to make sure that there is a gender balance and also there is a racial balance, given the fact that we know the dynamics of our country and the dynamics of our institution. But I'm glad that we represented women very well. I'll recommend you for the order of Ikamanga to the president. Without further ado, thank you very much. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Prof. Ndofrepi. Who will then take us through the book launch, and then that will be the last leg. After that, I'm not going to come back to the podium. My colleague from the International Office, Dr. Shaimombe, will then come and do the vote of thanks. Thank you very much, colleagues. And I assume those who are joining us virtually are still with us. Will then use this time to say goodbye to them for now. But then, of course, my other colleagues will be interacting with them. Thank you very much. Over to Prof.
I intend to do a few of my slides. Quickly. Thank you very much, colleagues, and once again, good afternoon. I am going to share with you a little bit of a synopsis of my current two book volumes. But meanwhile, as they connect, my philosophy of African higher education is reflected in a number of books that I have written. First, it was The Knowledge and Change in the African University, 2 volumes. And the second set was a list of books on 2 books on rurality as social justice in African higher education. And the third, interesting one is also on mediating teaching and learning in African higher education. Yet another set was on I can't remember the exact title, but it had to do with a philosophical aspect of the epistemological, axiological, and metaphysical aspects of knowledge in the African higher education. Now, the latest set of books that I'm sharing with you is a combination of 4 books that revolve around the theme of knowledge. I claim to be an African epistemologist in education. There are more of epistemological issues, but then having invited colleagues to make contributions to these books, I ended up realizing that with the influx of the demand or the supply of contributions from various authors, it only could culminate into 4 books. So far, I am at the 3rd. The first 2 are on, is it showing yet? The first 2 are on decolonizing African university knowledge. And I'll show you the differences between the 2. The last 2 are on unyoking African university knowledge. And I, again, will show you the differences. But the purpose of this launch is only on the first 2. So without further ado, I will proceed to indicate to you to say most of my philosophy of African higher education is informed by my background in the struggle for my country. And so I write what I think about the liberation of Africa in terms of knowledge and higher education. So the work in the first volume investigates the possibility of unyoking and decolonizing African university knowledges from the relics of colonialism. And in that volume, I speak to decolonization as a process through which the negative effects of colonialism are fought against with the purpose of giving rise to an environment where there is reliance and self-determination so that they become possible through freeing knowledge from colonial imposition. So, okay, this side. A little bit more. Thank you. Thank you. So the volume 1 is the one that is on, showing on the screen, Decolonizing African University Knowledges, Voices on Diversity and Plurality. Just do that. My prayer is that it should, technology will not take advantage of me. So in volume 1, I will not go through the finer details because I will trust your reading ability. Yeah, you can source the finer parts of the debates in the book, but then the volume, like I said earlier on, focuses on the unfinished project. The project of decolonization is not yet finished. So my case is that this volume is a scrutiny on the quality of curriculum that is offered in African higher education. And so I identified scholars from Africa to speak on the quest for diversity and plurality. Hence, in chapter 1, which I personally made a contribution, which I titled Gender, Disability and Rurality, Decoding the Themes in the African Milieu, where I decipher the notions of gender, disability, rurality in the African university. And this chapter serves as a radar to navigate through the chapters that are in the book. And then, oh, sorry, I'm going backwards. Let's go to the front. And then in chapter 2, one of my colleagues, may his soul rest in eternal peace, he passed on after contributing this chapter. He passed on at Free State University. He was found dead in his room. Dr. Erasmus Masetera reflects on the disability and educational justice in Africa's structurally unjust society during the time of the pandemic. And so he makes an argument that there is need for state political responsibility in ensuring that the educational rights of the disadvantaged are managed. And he makes a point in revealing the injustices of individuals living with disability. And finally, he concludes that there should be reasons that diversity in universities is taken into consideration. While in chapter 3, Swanakutlendo's chapter, which she refers to as improving processes and practices and structures in South African higher education, voices of students with disabilities, is a chapter which deals with the voices of students that are that have disabilities, and she makes a conceptual framework that is built on decolonial theory and critical disability theory to answer the question of the challenges of disabled students in higher education. And she concludes that the voices of students with disabilities could improve the specific structures and practices that happen in African higher education. In chapter 4, one of my colleagues, Professor Mokele, writes on the disability, diversity and inclusion in higher education with reference to Africa, and she uses critical analysis of literature to unmask the underlying relational mechanisms for inclusion and exclusion within the framework of epistemic access. While chapter 5 of this book by Martin Musengi is titled Decolonizing African University Curriculum by Unyoking Deaf Culture. His specialization is in deaf education, hence he emphasizes, he argues that universities tend to filter their understanding of deafness through a pathologic model that views disability as being in need of remediation. Now, yes, we've talked about the first section that was talking about disability. The next session, remember the title is on diversity and plurality. The next section is where we have in chapter 6, Beatrice Akala theorizing feminist voices in the curriculum in the African University, where she explores how women's voices have been subliminal in education discourses, more so in curriculum and knowledge production, where the voices of women are not heard and heard loudly. In chapter 7, Dr. Simon Oraya, he happens to be my postdoc fellow, is on knowledge democracy and feminist epistemological struggle in African universities, where he proffers the strategies that African women academics should persistently employ to challenge their relegation and stand their ground that they have a right to be knowers and custodians of knowledge. African women academics are normally not listened to. Their voices and their capacity to know is undermined in higher education. So the debates that are involved are included in chapter 7. In chapter 8, yet another gender issue, this name, yet another postdoc fellow of mine, she writes on gender equity concerns in marketizing, commodification of knowledge. And she uses this chapter as a springboard to develop a more broad-based, multi-method, large sample and comparison studies that focus on further documenting gender inequalities entrenched in marketization and commodification of knowledge. In chapter 9, the issue of digitizing higher education, the two authors provide a critique and they make a case that students in African universities, particularly those that are from rural backgrounds, are catered for in adopting e-learning as a model of instruction, and that strategies that take disadvantaged learners on board should be sought. I round off this book by writing on gender, disability, and rurality, and social justice in the African universities by looking at the opportunities going forward. So I share various ways of deliberating and also conclude that the questions of gender, disability, and rurality as notions embedded in social justice are contestable issues that vary from one institution to another. And however, while some strides are being made to adopt them in practice, African universities still await full fruition of recognizing diversity and plurality. That's the volume 1. This is distinct from the next one. Can those with skill come to assist this human being? I want to show this.
You just resume this.
Just indicate the chapter title as well as the...
Okay, thank you. Not showing.
Oopsie.
Okay, it's fine. Just leave it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the next title is on decolonizing African university knowledges. And this is a challenge for the neoliberal mantra, where we are saying, in instances where the impact of neoliberal thinking is being realized in the case of African higher education. And authors speak to the various views and ideas. And unfortunately, it's not turning on the screen. I am advised, or I'm informed, that I should stop at this point, so that where colleagues may be interested in getting the books, they are available, and I think they should be available in the local bookshops. But I don't have any extra copies on me. I do have a few other copies from what I have published. We can meet outside, and then we talk over the volumes that I have. Otherwise, for now, thanks. And that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Whole bunch.
Is that not mine?
Yes, it is. I just need to know who the...
Okay.
Yes. Can we please call upon the representative from the international student to give us our vote of thanks? Prof? Doctor, sorry, I'm speaking it in existence. You can come over, sir. Anele? Where? Okay, sir. Ubi? Oh, I'm looking at you. Thank you so much, Doc.
Good afternoon, colleagues and students. Thank you so much for making time to listen to the presentation. I always think that it's important that if you're a student, you get to expose yourself to different subject matter on campus, not only being confined to your own discipline, but then also just expose yourself and then sharpen your minds. I would like to thank, because the idea is to give a vote of thanks. I would like to thank Kenrad, our colleagues, Prof. Begim Gomezul. I want to thank you so much for organizing this. I think these are important engagements that we need in the university on different subject matters. Of course, I did leave my phone there because I understand that time is running out. I would have mentioned the names, but I think it's important that I acknowledge other colleagues from Kenrad. I won't mention your names. Of course, also from the international office, and then, of course, Prof, for the presentation and also for the book launch. Amongst other also academics that I may not also mention by names, the panelists, those ones who were responding to the presentation, the discussants. We want to thank you for making time for that. But above all, everyone who is in the house, in the room, would like to thank you for making this event be as it is like this. Because, I mean, if you didn't come, then it would have been an empty room. So we'd like to thank you for that, and then continue participating in these different engagements on campus. You learn something, you get to connect, you get to network, and also you enrich your own mind. Thank you so much.
We have finally gotten to the part I love, where there is food involved. So thank you very much, guys, for coming. And I would like to, oh, yes, there are two announcements that I have. May I kindly please ask all the panelists, the respondents, Prof, everybody that was up here in front to remain behind for a group photo for social media. And then secondly, I would like everybody now to relax and unfasten those belts, because there are refreshments for everybody outside. And then now it is time for us to be networking together. Thank you very much, guys.